Bienvenidos al Congreso Internacional de Emprendimiento con Innovación y al Tecnológico de Monterrey, Campus Chihuahua. Se les agradece apagar sus teléfonos celulares y aparatos electrónicos con el fin de no interrumpir el desarrollo del Congreso. Gracias. La teoría de la economía afirma que para desarrollar una buena política en economía se requiere del emprendimiento de la comunidad. Esta teoría se fundamenta en los estudios de casos de la Universidad de Nevada, Reno, y en la misma comunidad del norte de Nevada. Mi nombre es Belén Abella y hoy se expondrá el tema Entrepreneurship and Economic Development Theory and Practice, la mecánica del evento. Nuestro invitado hará uso de la palabra. Si tienen alguna duda pueden levantar la mano. Él está dispuesto a responder sus preguntas a lo largo del Congreso. Mark Pingle es profesor de emprendimiento y de economía en la Universidad de Nevada, Reno. Cuenta con publicaciones en macroeconomía, en comportamiento de la economía y en economía experimental. Su trabajo fue motivado por la necesidad de incrementar el desarrollo y la diversificación de la economía en el norte de Nevada. Es el creador de una comunidad sin fines de lucro que apoya el desarrollo de las capacidades en el emprendimiento. Démosle la más cordial bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso.
So I have to ask you, did she give me a good introduction? Because I have no idea. She did. Well, thank you for that. As she said, my name is Mark Pingle. I come from the USA, Reno, Nevada. Originally grew up in Oregon, if you know where that state is, up above Nevada. So I'm a West Coast kid. What I hope to accomplish here today is two basic things. One is explain from my perspective why entrepreneurship, which this wonderful institution has a focus upon, is important for economic development. So as was explained, to some extent, my area of study has been macroeconomics, among other things. And I'm going to ask you in a little bit to tell me what you think that's about. But I want to focus on why entrepreneurship is important for economic development a little bit. And then I want to go through what we've been doing in northern Nevada to proactively try to make entrepreneurship happen. I think many of the things that are going on here, especially the investment in this Pit 2 and Pit 3, goes far beyond anything going on in northern Nevada. So you are way ahead of us in that respect. I'm extremely jealous of those two buildings, and I've seen some of the students working on projects. There's just a lot of good things going on here, and we hope to develop a relationship where you, if you want to, can come up to northern Nevada. Some of our students can come down here. We can learn from you, you can learn from us, so I'll describe some of that. So let me start. Economics is about incentives. I want to ask someone if they could tell me what they think economics is about. So do you have an idea about what economics is about, maybe other than incentives? So if I say, I want to tell you about how entrepreneurship impacts economic development, what does economics study in general? Anybody willing to take a shot at that?
Because the more new businesses we have, the bigger or the greater the economic growth will be.
Okay.
So there will be more jobs, more opportunities.
Cool. So for being a participant, I'm going to give you something from the University of Nevada, Reno. Yeah. What I like to think of economics about is, in this context anyway, is how people get what they want. So we all want a lot of different things. We aspire to different things. It takes real resources to make that happen. How does the whole economic system work so that people can get more of what they want over time and live better, perhaps? So let me start into this. So we're going to start with the theory. And when we think about policy, economic policy, to me, in a basic sense, that involves deciding what do we want to do. one of the things that this school has proactively done is placed an emphasis on entrepreneurship. I'm going to share with you here, that's probably a good thing to do. But not everything we might do is necessarily a good thing to do. In order to make a better action than a worse action, it's good to understand theory. And so, what is theory? To me, theory, in a basic sense, is how the world works. So if we wanted to shoot a rocket to the moon, and I guess we have to understand something about physics in order to make that happen. If we want to make economic development happen so that the lives of people are better, it would be good to understand how a social system works in some sense in order for it to develop. So there is a famous economist who lived and did his work about 100 years ago named Joseph Schumpeter. Have any of you heard of Schumpeter? No? A few? Okay. You have not. So he wrote a book, actually, I think in 1932, I've got that up there, called A Theory of Economic Development. And he distinguished development. Not everyone would do this today, but he distinguished that word development from economic growth. And he said development is really different. And I'll give you a few other things here. It is not just something that unfolds gradually over time. Development involves major moves forward. And he says it comes from novelty. So our word innovation, how do you say it in Spanish?
Innovación.
Okay, I should give you all one of these. Innovación, something like that. Comes from this word novelty. They're related in the Latin. And it involves doing things new. I'll show you what Schumpeter thought here in a moment. But you have some examples down here. The taming of electricity, using electricity, has been described as the greatest invention ever. So think of how the world would be different if there was no electricity. Very different, right? So that's a major change in the world that really only happened a little more than 100 years ago, say 130 years ago. So not that long, maybe the world's greatest invention. Railroad, airplane, internet. Back in the 1880s, there was an economist named Jacob Viner, who was very well known at the time, who headed up the U.S. Patent Office. You know what a patent is? Well, he headed up the U.S. Patent Office. He was a fairly smart guy. Here's what he said. Everything ever invented that will be invented that's really significant has already been invented. That's what he said in about 1880. Most of this stuff, airplane, internet, computer, all that stuff later. So when you think out into the future, might there be some more significant innovation?
Yeah.
Probably, right? And maybe some of you will have a hand in that. These things, Joseph Schumpeter said, they created economic development. And he said, explaining novelty, how is it that these things come about, is the greatest unmet scientific challenge. We really don't know how it comes about, but he offered an answer, and his answer was entrepreneurs. So his basic theory of novelty is entrepreneurs innovate. And he would distinguish between scientists who invent things and the entrepreneurs who put them into practice. The way he described it is entrepreneurs carry out new innovations. So if you would take one thing here today, I guess, maybe something a little bit different in terms of what does it mean to be an entrepreneur, is you put things together in a new way. How many of you have heard of the candy Reese's Peanut Butter Cup? Do you know Reese's? I don't know if you've ever seen this television commercial, but there's a television commercial where somebody was walking with a can of peanut butter and someone else had chocolate, and they ran into one another. They put those two together and they got the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. They'd never had that combination before. I don't think that's probably the way it was invented. But somebody got the idea of putting those two together, and it's a fairly popular candy bar. It's one of my favorites. I eat too much. So we're nearing the end of what I want to say on, well, this part of it, but one, I think, important theory of economic development is it happens when entrepreneurs do what they do. And if people are just left free so that they can be innovative, then development will naturally happen. What that means is if development's not happening, it often is because people are kept from being able, for different reasons, to innovate. And of course, if they're incentivized, that helps as well. Oh, let me do this. So I've seen some neat posters around. Maybe we can go one person at a time, and I'll give you this one since I already. These are some things Joseph Schumpeter said about entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs are leaders, not followers. What are some other characteristics of entrepreneurs that you have heard of? Say it again. Creative. Good. Creative. So thank you for that. Somebody else. Passion. Okay. Passion. What else? I like passion. I think passion is important.
They search to supply a necessity.
They say, do what?
To supply a necessity.
They supply a necessity. Okay, they look for people's needs and try to satisfy those. I will give you that one.
Open mind.
Take risks.
Flexibility.
So I can't throw these out. So you can. Yeah, let me give you some of these. And I actually have many of these, so if you want one later, if I don't throw one at you, you could get one. So Joseph Schumpeter said, and there's one in this list that I want to dwell on a little bit, but a nonconformist maybe beats to a different drum. I actually am a little bit encouraged with entrepreneurship education. I assume this is a little bit true in Mexico as well, but in the United States there are a lot of smart kids who just don't do well in school, but might make wonderful entrepreneurs. If we could focus and allow them to be entrepreneurs as they go through school, I think we might have fewer kids going in the wrong directions. There's the creativity somebody mentioned. This is the one I want to dwell on. So Joseph Schumpeter dwelled on this and some others. Entrepreneurs maybe have a capacity, more so than most, to see where something new may satisfy a need or a want well enough that it can pay for itself. So there are many good ideas. Let me take art. My definition of art is if I can do it, it's not art. So do you see what I mean? There are some things that I see, I could do that. That's not that good. That should not be hanging here as something great. Other things I see, wow, that is art. And of course, art is the mind in the eye of the beholder. There are paintings, Van Gogh, I don't even like Van Gogh. But if I found a Van Gogh in my basement, I might keep it, right, or sell it. It would have some value, not because I like it, but because other people like it. And so entrepreneurs have a capacity to see what people will like, understand whether or not the costs that go into that can cover the price that people will be willing to pay. Will it make a profitable business? That's a particular entrepreneurial talent. Then an interesting thing, Joseph Schumpeter focuses on these things. This actually is a little bit more Frank Knight, who I'll share with you in a little bit. Entrepreneurs are a little bit fighters, at least he says. And they desire, we don't have kings so much, a little bit more, but you may be a king of your business. And so this is something that at least some argue motivates entrepreneurs. Frank called business, I think this is an interesting quote, this economist is one of the most significant economists of all time. Had the Nobel Prize been around when he lived, he would have surely won it. He wrote a book, if you're interested in this kind of thing, he wrote a book called Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. That's maybe the most important book, economics book, historically, for an entrepreneur to read. But he was talking about business, and he said it's the biggest, most fascinating thing yet invented, not even accepting statecraft or warfare. So if you think of the founding fathers in the United States, or Pancho Villa, whoever is great in Mexico, in terms of moving a society forward, you would say, well, that would be exciting to be that kind of person. what Frank Knight is so arrogant to say is being an entrepreneur is exciting. It's a great game. It's a tough game to play, a fun game. I'm going to take a little bit of an aside here because I met someone. Let me just take this time. How many of you are doing engineering? You're not entrepreneurship or business so much. Okay, so about half of you almost. How many of you are doing something that's more directly related to entrepreneurship? Okay, so about. Now, I talked to someone, and I don't know if she's here. I talked to someone yesterday of doing finance. So is there anyone doing something that's not so much you're going to start your own business, but you want to learn finance, accounting, marketing? You might envision yourself not starting your own business, but going and working for a bigger company. How many of you are in that boat? Some? None. Okay, 1, 2. So I want to just touch on one idea here. You may have a great business idea, but you can't find anyone to finance it. It takes some real money to build the equipment, make it all happen. So one thing that Joseph Schumpeter talked about, Frank Knight talked about even more, was that financiers, bankers, venture capitalists, people with money, play an important role in the entrepreneurial process because they, in a certain set, decide what moves forward and what doesn't because they provide the financing. And there are some ideas here that are important. Some of these are very basic. Frank Knight talks about these in his 1921 book. But when we think of equity financing versus debt, normally you'll earn a higher rate of return with equity financing, but it's more variable. Well, why would that be? Frank Knight is the first one to carefully make the point that the extra return for equity financing has to do with the fact that there's more uncertainty involved with building a business than there is financing a business that already has significant revenues. So one of the sayings is, well, the people who can go to the bank and get money are people who don't need it because they have plenty of money coming in already. Normally, to get debt financing, you have to either have revenues coming in that can back that loan and show that you can pay it back, or you have to have assets already, put your home at stake or something else. And then these ideas I'm throwing in here just because I think they're important when you think about economic development. There's quite a bit of evidence that innovation happens more in big firms or small firms? Small. The basic role of big firms in an economy is to be efficient at producing. You know there's a market for it, people are buying it. How can you make the production process as efficient as possible to deliver that at a low cost? There is not so much, if you could have a profitable company out into the indefinite future, there's not such a strong incentive to do something new. Whereas if you're not a millionaire already, there's more of an incentive to innovate. And so we do, maybe for incentive reasons, see small firms innovate more than large. Large firms are catching on. Have you heard this term in English? We would call it, instead of entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship. And it's the idea that big firms would innovate. When they do that, they will often be willing to spin off whole separate units to do that. And their company, the big company, will fund a subunit within the big company to work on a new product. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But why does that make sense? It's because when there's uncertainty, sometimes you're right, the entrepreneur's vision is correct, and this business just goes. Then you're on the positive side of uncertainty, and you see very rapid growth, and the people who have invested make a lot of money. But of course, on the other side, they fail. What you thought was true doesn't work out. And the nice thing for society is if it's a big firm, then that's a big negative impact. But if it's a small firm that fails, then it's only a small shock to the economy. So it makes sense economy-wide that small firms innovate more. The next thing I'll go through are just, I'm going to make the argument here after this slide that developing an entrepreneurial culture is a good approach to economic development. There are some alternatives that are important to think about. One is if you have two economies, one saves more than the other, people within that economy save more, that economy will tend to grow faster. Can somebody name an economy where people save more either than maybe they do in Mexico or in the U.S.? China. Who said China? Okay, I better give you a... So if you can filter that back. Oh, I can almost make it. Yeah, China is known. And what's interesting is most people would think, well, if you have more income, it's easier to save, right? Because you're not giving up so much to do that. And yet some low-income countries have higher savings rates. What you could show with economic theory is that if two economies are exactly the same, and then one increases its savings rate, that one will move to a higher standard of living. And that's because the saving flows into machines that make people more productive. But the thing is, it's only a one-time improvement in the living standard. For you to have consistent improvement in the living standard, you would have to consistently increase the savings rate. And that just doesn't happen. So the bottom line is, increasing the savings rate may be a good idea to get a one-time improvement in the standard of living, but it's not a good long-term economic development strategy, so we can toss that one out. Another one that's very popular is to pick an industry and have government really promote it. Sometimes it's called industrial targeting, sometimes it's called clustering. There's actually not much evidence that this works. There is evidence that it doesn't work and that it wastes a lot of money. So there's probably more evidence that it doesn't work than that it works. And part of the reason it's natural to think this would work is there's a principle that is very important in economics called comparative advantage. I don't know what you would... Do you call it that in Spanish? How do you say it? Does anybody know this concept, comparative advantage?
Ventaja competitiva.
Say it.
Ventaja comparativa.
I won't try to repeat that. So the idea is that certain countries that, say if you have a sea coast, if I take historically the Netherlands, a big trading empire because they have a sea coast. If you're totally landlocked, then you can't focus on shipping as an industry, right? So sometimes the environmental characteristics determine what areas your country will naturally focus upon. Over time, things may evolve where one economy has higher wages than another, and so one, because of the lower wages, at least for a while until they catch up, can focus on certain industries rather than another. So there are reasons for focusing on one job rather than another, but if you try to go against that, if, say, your comparative advantage is to produce textiles, and you want to produce computers, if government puts a lot of money into producing computers and that's not your comparative advantage, then it's like swimming upstream, you would say. You may be able to do it, but you would be better off putting that money maybe toward textiles or something that you have a comparative advantage in. If you already have a comparative advantage, you don't need to put money into that to develop it, so it's often wasted. And so having government focus as a strategy, let's build high tech, let's build textiles, let's build shipping, whatever it is, there's not much evidence that works, even though it's kind of natural to think that way. Another thing that probably works a little better, has more evidence behind it, is if you have an economy where people aren't free, including free to innovate, then freeing that up a little bit can work, but it's not a panacea. So once you're somewhat free, if I take China, for example, and India, why are they developing so much faster today than in the past? I would say it's because they have freed themselves up at least a little bit, right? But will that work out into the indefinite future? No, for two reasons. One, you can only be so free, but also There are things like guilds, unions, monopoly, and even corruption. You've got to pay this person to get through a heavy bureaucracy. That's been India's problem historically. It can keep that from becoming as effective as an entrepreneurship strategy. So here are 4 reasons why, and this has some literature behind it to say focusing on entrepreneurship actually can help an economy develop. So I'm going to skip the first one and talk about the second one. So there is evidence that the kinds of activities that we're doing here, you interacting with me interacting with you interacting with your colleagues, can lead to more entrepreneurship and more economic development because of that. And that's because developing something new that can create new business and move a society forward involves seeing things that other people don't see. And you usually don't do that just thinking on your own. Travel, talking to others, you get ideas that you didn't have before. And especially if things are more developed some other area in the world, you can just transfer those ideas to your economy. And that will help. So there's strong evidence that social interaction facilitates. Countries like North Korea, Cuba, that separate themselves from the rest of the world, are they real well developed? No, right? So that's not a good idea. The opposite is better. If you focus, so if you have a business, or your parents have a business, or someone has a business, if it's only doing business within Mexico, and then you seek to go international, there's evidence that that will help economic development of an area, not just because that business has more business, but because they will become more innovative. They will start doing things that they didn't do before. And then the last thing is just, how many of you had a business and it failed? Are you willing to recognize you tried something and it didn't work? That is okay. You're willing to do. I better give you one. Thank you. So they have this word, Renaissance entrepreneurship. If you try a business and even if it fails, you're more likely to succeed the next time, in part because of that experience. So part of learning how to make a business succeed is just doing it. You have a whole environment where people are starting up businesses. Many of them work, many of them don't. But there's a general discussion of what to do versus what not to do. That knowledge will help the society grow. And the last thing that's kind of interesting, I'm going to share here next what we do in Northern Nevada, and I'll share it with you a little bit about our entrepreneurship program. We teach students, and we follow actually many of the same approaches that are used here, the business model canvas. How many of you have heard of the business model canvas? A few of you. Okay, about half of you. I think there are going to be some sessions on that later. We use these tools to help train people how to build a business, avoid certain mistakes. Well, there's evidence that a more important thing is actually to train people how to look for opportunities. I only know of a couple ways of doing that, so I'm more interested, but there apparently is evidence you can train people how to look for opportunities, and that is in particular important, maybe more important than showing them how to run the business. Okay, so let's move to getting practical. What I'm going to do here, and I'll run through this more quickly, some things that we've been doing in Northern Nevada. I got asked 5 years ago to create an entrepreneurship program at our university, University of Nevada, Reno. We have about 18,000 students. We have a medical school. We have engineering. We have very good science departments. We have a business school. But we didn't have a focus on entrepreneurship, and I would distinguish entrepreneurship from classic business school training. Entrepreneurship training, you look at the startup, whereas business school training, you look at people going from the business school into bigger companies that are already operating. And the main difference, I like Steve Blank's discussion Who can tell me anything about Steve Blank? How many of you have heard of Steve Blank? So he's kind of an author.
He's an author for, I think he's written some books about the business model.
Yeah, he's recognized for his, he's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who got hired by both Stanford and UC Berkeley to work on their entrepreneurship programs. He developed an approach that I would call a learning by doing approach. Rather than studying it, actually build businesses. And that's my understanding of the focus here. And I think that's a very good approach. We're adopting the very same approach at the University of Nevada, Reno. So we introduced that 5 years ago. I'll tell you a little bit about our program. Another thing that in the United States we call tech transfer. So pretty much I would say every major university has a tech transfer office. What they do, the reason they call it that, is the idea is when scientists and engineers work on new technologies, new ideas, they're in charge of trying to transfer those to industry so that they actually impact people's lives. And it's thought that that could help with economic development. Then I'll ask you a question here. How many of, well, I'll make a statement first and then I'll ask you a question. In northern Nevada, there are many resources. When we first got into this, we found about 50 either organizations or programs that supported entrepreneurs in one way or another. Most of the services were free, and yet they weren't coordinated at all. There was much duplication. And let me just ask you this question. Is that the same here in Mexico or different?
Same.
Same? So there are a lot of people out there who could help you, but they don't work together. How many of you heard of the Disney movie or seen it, Finding Nemo? Have you seen Finding Nemo? So do you remember Dory the fish? At the end of the movie, she's caught in this net, right? And Nemo, of course, wants to get her out of there, and he teaches all the fish to do what?
To go down.
Go in the same direction, right? And if they swam in the same direction, they freed her, they broke the net. And so I think it's kind of the same concept. What we're trying to do in northern Nevada is, can we coordinate better, get these groups that all support entrepreneurs in one way or another, can we get them swimming in the same direction so that we can have a bigger impact? And the ultimate goal, you could say, is building a culture of entrepreneurship, which I'm trying to convince you is a good economic development strategy, better than some alternatives. So I'll go through here pretty quickly. This is the first course in entrepreneurship. We actually use Steve Blank's new book, which is called The Startup Owner's Manual. And all of the students in that class work on a real business idea, either their own, one obtained from our tech transfer office, or one from the community, I say here. It could be another student who they work with. There's no prerequisites, so the thing we're trying to do is make this opportunity available for scientists, engineers, art majors. Anyone can take an entrepreneurship course. There's no prerequisite. Let me ask you if this is the same here. In our engineering school, for somebody to graduate with an engineering degree, they have no room in their schedule for any other courses, including an entrepreneurship course. Are those of you doing engineering, do you have room to take other classes, or is your work pretty much focused on engineering? You have some room? Okay, thank you for that information. Yeah, at our school there's really not much room, and that's partly why we want this first course to be one that if somebody just wants some exposure, they can do that. We do have a next step up is an entrepreneurship minor. It includes this first course and 5 other courses, so it's more of an immersion. But it's available, so the emphasis of our program, both at the undergraduate level and graduate level, so MBA students now can also focus in entrepreneurship. But there aren't prerequisites, so we don't want to keep anyone from being able to get into this. You don't have to be a business student. That's the way we have it organized now. We also have an entrepreneurship club that's very active. So when our entrepreneurship courses are really junior, senior level courses. So how do you, if you're an entering freshman, get involved in entrepreneurship? You can do that here. We had a former alumni who has a wonderful entrepreneurial story. He got fired, he said, from his first 3 corporate jobs and figured out he should do something on his own. He ended up mortgaging his house for $50,000, and that's why this prize is $50,000, and he bought a company with it. It was an aircraft ignition switch company for small planes. By the time he sold his company to General Electric for a couple $100 million, he was putting his ignition switch into every new plane in the world, he said. So he was a very successful entrepreneur. He gave us $1 million to fund this competition, and this competition has been nice at getting students, faculty, and staff to present their ideas and get them going. And so the way this works is there's a winner-take-all. Usually there's about 100 people competing in this competition. There's a process to narrow it down, but they get $50,000 to start their business. It also supports our academic programs. And I should have mentioned, if there are any questions at any point, especially now I'm going through something that may relate to what you're doing, feel free to raise your hand and ask. I'll go through this very quickly. We started this program, I got asked to do this in September of 2008. I said yes in early September 2008. What happened just a little bit past that?
Economic crisis?
Yeah, the financial crisis. And our university, Nevada got hit harder than any other state because Nevada was a fast-growing state. Our university had 30% budget cuts, which is pretty much unheard of in U.S. higher education. So very large budget cuts. So we started this program. While other programs were being cut, that meant we had to do it totally with outside resources. So we haven't so far. It's not really true because I'm on salary, but for the program itself, we haven't used any funding. So we've had to go out to the community, and it's important for us going forward that it be sustainable. Another thing that's important for us is we want both real entrepreneurs involved in our program, so the experience is very practical. And we want professors involved so it's connected to the university. So that tie, and I've seen that tie here as well. So I think that's a good thing. I'll tell you a little bit about tech transfer. So tech transfer, again, they work with the scientists and engineers who are developing all these cool things. I'll just give you one example. One guy who I've gotten to know has taken some cancer drug, and he could put it in a little plastic bubble, basically, that can be injected. The therapy isn't available, but he worked with a medical school professor, so that little, your cancer therapy doesn't just go through your whole system. What it does is it attaches, there's a marker, it can attach just to the cancer, and then when you run the person through an MRI machine that has magnetic resonant imaging, it will make these little iron particles inside the bubble, which I guess don't hurt you, but it will burst that bubble so that the cancer medicine just is released right at the point of the cancer and doesn't make you nearly as sick. So they're doing some very cool stuff like that. It's the job of this office to get that out. Well, what they had mainly done in the past is they help researchers stay legal and file patents, and that's good. And they were into licensing technology, though that didn't happen very much. The new culture is this office won't file a patent for you if you're a scientist or an engineer unless they first of all see that your technology has some commercial potential. So this is a very strong incentive for the researchers within the university to actually be working on ideas that have some commercial potential. They're starting to encourage researchers to network with companies. They're emphasizing new company creation now for the first time, and so this is a good thing. And these are two companies that are coming along out of university technologies. So I'll tell you a little bit about the community. In northern Nevada, and I'm pretty sure this is true other places, as I mentioned, there are all these organizations that will help you. The thing is, what my experience has been is they all want to give the indication that they're the one you should go to, not all these other people. And so they will actually criticize the others. That doesn't happen here, does it? And so how do you get these coordinated? It's been a challenge, but we have a new organization that's called Entrepreneurship Nevada. It's a nonprofit, and it was difficult to get going. It actually took us about 3 years, but now what happens once a month, and I think we meet, and all these different organizations sit around a table and they just share what's going on, and there are actually some new community initiatives. And there's a commitment. The main thing with this new organization is everybody who comes to the table commits to coordinate. It doesn't always happen perfectly, but some good things are starting to happen from that. There's a common community calendar where all the different events that can help entrepreneurs are posted. And then the last thing that I'm going to share with you is something that I'm working on right now, and that is, it's not even close to having a wonderful building like this out here, but we call this a virtual incubator. How many of you have heard of a sales funnel? Who can describe a sales funnel to me? What is a sales funnel? Have you heard of this? Well, I'll tell you then. The idea is if you want to make some sales, you have a big group of potential users. So the idea is the potential users are very large, and you have some way of reaching them. And then you narrow down to people who are more likely to buy. And finally, you get to the people coming out of the sales funnel who are actually buying. So you're going to get more coming out of the bottom, the idea is, if the top of the funnel is wider. So the way I think of this virtual incubator is it's a funnel for new startups in the community. So this is a cooperative effort between our university, the local community college, and groups in the community. And all that happens if you do have to take a class that demonstrates so that you know the language of entrepreneurship, so to speak. But after that, if you put your business in this new virtual incubator, then this group of people that I mentioned will surround you and help you. Not as mentors, you're still responsible for developing your business, but you set monthly goals, you meet with a contact person, they learn what your issues are, that's fed out to this network, and then you can get information back. As businesses develop, there are physical incubators like you have out here, PIT 3, but these are private sector incubators, and you can put your business into those. So it gets people into this network, and it's a pretty good thing. Two elements of that. One is an entrepreneur assembly. People in the community come together once a month, and they work. Basically, the business model canvas is what they work. They work on their business, but it's a place where you can get that social interaction, share ideas. Another idea is e-hours, and this idea is if you think about going, it's actually at a coffee shop, and there are many tables, and there might be an intellectual property table, a marketing table, finance table. If your business is looking toward getting some financing, you can go to the finance table and enter into a discussion. So it's a real casual place that people can just show up once a month. And so our people in our virtual incubators participate in those two things. And then we follow the Steve Blank approach, which I think many of you are familiar with. So I'm almost done here. In terms of creating a culture, another thing that we've started working on, and I guess I'll leave this. How many of you here is your parent an entrepreneur? So they've either started a business, and I'll include operating a business. How many of them? So you come from a family, so okay. I'll share with you if baseball. I'll share with you an interesting statistic. I'll take a little aside. I played baseball when I was younger. I like that sport. And now I'm in economics in a book called Freakonomics. Have any of you heard of this book, Freakonomics? They talk in there, I forget if it's the first or the second one, but there's evidence that if you're born in August, you have a higher probability of making the major leagues than if you're born in July. Can anybody tell me why?
Yeah, because the cut date.
Because the cutoff date for Little League and some of the higher level leagues is August 1st. So I was actually born August 17th. And so I turned 12 and got to play one extra year of Little League compared to my friends. And when that happens, of course, you're bigger, you get patted on the back more because you're a better athlete. Well, it's only because you're older, it's not because you're any better. But you get those pats on the back, and there's actually statistical evidence that if you're born in August, which shouldn't make any difference at all, you actually have a higher probability of making the major leagues than if you were born in July. But you want to know what makes a much bigger difference, like 10 times bigger difference? If your father or your parent was a professional athlete, the likelihood of you being a professional athlete goes way up. Do you think the likelihood that you being a successful entrepreneur goes up if your parents were an entrepreneur? Yes. Because you've just seen it. You've maybe lived it, right? You know what's expected, whereas others going into that don't know. And so when I first got into this, building this entrepreneurship program at our university, I got together 5 entrepreneurs. I'll tell you some of them that I remember. One guy is Roger Whittenberg. He invented Trex decking, if you know what that is. Instead of building your deck out of wood, you can build it out of composite. And he's a billionaire because of that. There was another guy who invented the software that most cell phone networks use. He was a wealthy guy. And the last guy I'll mention worked with Jack Welch at General Electric, so he wasn't so much an entrepreneur, he worked more as an executive, but he was the top human resources guy for General Electric when Jack Welch was there. And so, all very accomplished, and my basic question to them was, if I want to impact the community with a new entrepreneurship effort, what should I do? And the thing that we evolved to was, or that they evolved to was, starting at the college level is too late. They all told stories of when they were little. The one guy who was the Jack Welch executive, not only had a paper route when he was 10 or 12, but he started hiring other kids to do extra paper routes. So he was already an entrepreneur in a certain sense. And so we are working now with youth down to about age 12, getting them into programs that involve entrepreneurship. And I think that's important. And one thing that we want to do, I don't know if it's true here in Mexico, but it's very common for parent or friends to ask young kids, what are you going to be when you grow up? A fireman, a policeman, a lawyer, a doctor? How many of them would ever say an entrepreneur? That's just not, but we want people to start saying, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to build a business, I'm going to build my kingdom, right? And then I mentioned technological commercialization, and that effort involves collaboration with industry, which I know is a stress here, so we have that in common. We have our entrepreneurship program. The last thing I'll mention is the state actually is finally getting involved. So I believe a big chunk, what I've heard is a big chunk of the money for these new buildings here on your campus, the Pit 2 and Pit 3 have been provided by government. I would love to have Pit 2 and Pit 3 right along the freeway by our university. I think it would transform our city in northern Nevada. Well, they're starting out with some small things where they're funding some things at the university. It's mainly related to tech transfer. But some good things are happening, and I guess I'll end with just saying I talked to a couple of young people who have businesses, and they think maybe either I or someone in northern Nevada could help them with their businesses in the United States. If you're in that situation, I'll go back to the first slide and put my email address up there again. You can email me and just let me know. A couple of things we're talking about with the administrators here is an exchange program where you might come for, say, 3 or 4 weeks to the United States and spend time with people just like you who are wanting to start businesses, spend 3 or 4 weeks there, and then the groups from the United States would come back with you and spend 3 or 4 weeks doing something here, so that you get that cross-culture thing, and maybe even can execute some real business deals kinds of things. So if you have ideas on how we could cooperate or how I could help you either through this school or individually, I'm happy to help. So I'm going to end with just some pictures of our area. So if you haven't seen Lake Tahoe, it's the #1 outdoor tourist destination in the world for good reason. I don't think these pictures even very well capture the beauty. And then this is our campus. This middle picture is 2 new buildings. So we have one of the most high-tech libraries. There's still books there, but it's mostly electronic. But it's won awards, so it's a neat place, and that's the new student union. So there's some good things. This is the old part of campus, the quad. It's kind of like it was built to mimic Harvard, where I've never been and seen, but it's supposed to be like the Harvard quad. So you are welcome to visit. So that's what I have for you. Any questions before I let you go? Yes?
If you have an idea that it's going to take a lot of resources, would you suggest starting out small or searching out investors?
The easy answer is it depends, but I'll say if you can start out small, that's a good thing because you can learn as you start out small. I'll give you an example. I mentioned polymeric designs. It's actually the spearhead of that is the chair of our chemical engineering group, and his name's Alan Fuchs. He asked me to participate with him because I'm working on all this entrepreneurship stuff. And he's the one with the targeted cancer therapy idea. That would take many millions of dollars because of all the FDA stuff. We're putting that one far on the back burner. What we've been able to work on is there's a specific problem. If you're doing this business canvas workshop later, I might, depending upon what's good for the workshop, share some of the canvases that we've developed for that. But what we're working on actually is not saving people's lives, but it's making a better asphalt roofing shingle, right? And that's because it's one that we think we can get to revenue sooner that will support other things, maybe more exciting things that we might do. Other questions or? All right. Well, thanks for your time. Feel free. I'll run this back to the beginning so that if you want my email address, you can email me. There. All right. Actually, I'll give you these until they run out if you're interested. So just come on up. Okay. All right. It's in Spanish, so I'm not sure. That's great. Thank you very much.
En nombre del Tecnológico de Monterrey, Campus Chihuahua, les damos las gracias por su asistencia. Ha concluido la conferencia.